Today on With the First Pick, football is back, baby. Man, am I excited. Almost as excited as producer Sharon, laughing in our ears. We're trying to start a show here. We're going to talk about the college football weekend that was, the performances we loved, some performances left us wanting a little more, what it all means when you look at it through the lens of the NFL draft. I'm Ryan Wilson, that handsome Devils former Titans GM Ran Carthon, celebrating that Gators victory. Rand, I'll be honest, I don't know if William Mary won this weekend, but let's just assume they did. This is episode 293. There are 234 days until the 2026 NFL Draft in Pittsburgh, PA. Rand, I love to see you smile. I love that football is back. The weather's cooling off. Probably cooler for you, too, down there in Nashville. I'm up here in central New York. Last weekend was a lot of fun for me just watching these kids after doing all the summer scouting over the last few months. What were your takeaways from watching a little football as the leaves start to turn?
Man, it was just good to create a norm, so to speak. It's like when football season is in, you can fully plan out your week because you know what's coming. And, once the NFL season kicks off, you can pretty much plan your weekend, just based off of what games you're trying to catch. So it was good to have football back. And I've always been such a big fan of college football. And it was just fun to see those guys out there playing this week.
It was a lot of fun, in part because some of the guys that I love, that you owe an apology to, and I'm going to talk about later in the show, had big evenings and afternoons. Making your face there. You'll know when I say their name, and it'll be there's a tease there. Hang around for that because producer Sharon is involved because his team. The thing about producer Sharon, he has like 7 or 8 teams, so at some point he's going to have some successes, but a lot of his team has felt like come up on the short end of the stick.
Yeah, I mean the team, the player, whoever he was talking about before we came on air, I'm just like, come on. When he was like, from the best team, I'm like, wait a minute, this is like the fifth team that you've named as your team or his guy. So you just never know with Sharon, man. We just take it day by day.
And I'll say it again. I don't know what's going on with the hiring process, but every single producer we work with is from Penn State, has some ties to Penn State. It doesn't make sense. By the way, and we'll talk about this team later in the show, but shout out to our guys, Danny Cannell and Brian McFadden, for the huge win, Florida State, making Alabama look like an FCS program. I'll say this when we move on. Sometimes the grass is green enough where you are, and I'm talking about Kalen DeBoer just staying at Washington where he was dominating. He went up to the big leagues, and he's been striking out a lot. And I say that for a team that was successful last year, but you're following Babe Ruth, and sometimes it don't go quite as planned.
Yeah, man, it was going to be virtually impossible to follow in the shoes of Nick Saban because even if you won 2 back-to-back national championships, Saban still has 6 at Alabama and 1 at LSU. So it was going to be tough. You appreciate the effort. But man,
you laughed at
they got to figure it out. Yeah, they got to figure it out down there in Bama.
In a hurry. That's right. There's no patience down there. It's one thing to follow Nick Saban. Something else to follow Quinn Ewers of Texas, apparently. Hey, producer Ron, you got that video of C.J. Stroud back at the 2023 Combine? Can we fire that thing up? I want to get Rand's thoughts on this, what C.J. told us at the Combine after our buddy Rick Spielman saw him play his very first game starting at Ohio State against Minnesota, and this is how this went.
I was at his first start, and it was at the University of Minnesota that night game. And I was watching in the first half. I says, man, I don't know if Ohio State has a quarterback. And then all of a sudden in the second half, you came out and lit it up. Right. I had to erase my whole report.
He said he would have bet you. Why you erasing? They don't get messed up. You know how it is. Yeah. They don't let us warm up. You know what I'm saying? It's my first game ever. It's raining. It's cold. Right. It's 60,000. Let a young brother warm up. You feel me?
CJ, let me thank you on behalf of me for taking Rick to task because he's been giving me the business all week.
Sure.
Let a young brother warm up. So I play that, Rand, because, we've been talking, and everybody on planet Earth, nonstop for 3 months about Arch Manning. Arch came out there, and look, Texas lost to Ohio State last year with Quinn Ewers in the playoffs. I don't know if Quinn Ewers wins that game over the weekend, but Arch didn't play great is the point. Quinn was a 7th-round pick. Arch, we can't quit talking about him as the face of college football and soon to be the face of a franchise as the first overall pick whenever he comes out. Can we just pump the brakes and let Arch be a redshirt sophomore? Because while he didn't play great, I'm not worried about him. But as C.J. Stroud instructs us all. Can we just let a young brother in Archquavius warm up?
I was just about to say, man, just let Archquavius cook. This was my biggest takeaway from this game when everything happened and the game was over. The first thing I said was, man, now we got to talk about Arch Manning being a faller, just off of 1 week. And I'm like, man, we got to talk about this all week. But, I'll say this, and I know we probably have a little time to talk about it later. I don't think there are very many stars from college football that played like stars this weekend. I mean, if you have one, name them for me. But more than anything, my biggest takeaway from all of this, man, was just how these defensive coordinators, they seem to be catching up. And, Matt Patricia did a heck of a job game planning and scheming. But, even focusing on Arch, he missed some throws, and that just is what it is. He missed his first throw of the game, which I think would have got him rolling. But I think after he missed a couple throws, I think the game plan became kind of conservative, if you will. And they have a nice 1-2 punch in the backfield, so why not lean heavily on the run game? This was Arch's first road start, and of all places to do it at the Horseshoe. You know what I mean? So, why not give him a chance to rely on this run game? They have two really good backs that are explosive players. And I just think that the game plan it didn't lead to a rhythm, so to speak. And that's how Arch played. He had some nice NFL caliber throws, but just the overall consistency just wasn't there this weekend.
Yeah, Wisner and our guy C.J. Baxter, they never could really get going as well. One of the bright spots for me was Trevor Gooseby, the left tackle, who's a young player, and I thought he availed himself pretty well. The right tackle struggled a little bit, and he's an underclassman, but there weren't a lot of bright spots. And it is interesting that you talk about Sark. It feels like playing a little too conservative, and I don't know if he's like, you know what, I want to manage Arch. I don't want to put too much on him. And Arch, after the game, was as cool as you would imagine he would be. He seemed unconcerned by all of it. He seemed unconcerned while he was on the bench in between series as well. He just had a bad game. Tom Brady played like crap occasionally. So did Peyton Manning. It doesn't mean they're not good football players. And I think, if nothing else, maybe we can all just take a step back and take a breath and let Arch grow into this role before we, crown him that he's the next coming of Peyton and Eli put together. But let's talk about some of those positive guys there. Well, let me start here first. No concerns about Arch in any way, shape, or form going forward, I would imagine?
No, not as of now. Now, if this continues throughout to the middle part of the season, then yeah, we got some questions. But I don't expect this to continue. This was a really good learning lesson. Like I said, coming out of the gate, your first road start, and it said for all places, Columbus, Ohio. So that's a tough environment for anybody. There's not very many quarterbacks that have gone in there and played particularly well. So I'm at this point, I'm not concerned at all. But in the words of Coach Bill Parcells, I do reserve the right to change my mind.
Yeah, and you are what your record says you are. And right now, Texas is 0-1 because, and look, Arch is not going to face a tougher defense almost certainly over the course of the season. And they play in the SEC. So, yeah, he got a wake-up call. Now, you could argue that both Garrett Nussmeier and Cade Klubnik played some pretty good defenses. Garrett probably outdid the three quarterbacks we're talking about for our purposes here, but I'm not worried. I'm less concerned about Arch than I am any other person in college football who didn't have a great weekend. So, all right. As anyone could have predicted, we started this conversation with Arch, and, he wasn't the riser, but that's okay. When we come back, we're going to continue talking Ohio State, Texas, and we're going to talk about some guys that got our attention, both names you may know and names you should know, and we'll do that right after this break. All right, Rand, let's continue our discussion of Ohio State, Texas, and let's talk about some guys that are risers, or as we like to say here and with the first pick, some pops and drops. Arch is a drop, but just for now. But some guys who have popped onto the scene in Saturday afternoon's action. Man, that was a fun game, even though it was defensive heavy. I'm going to start with one of your guys, and perhaps someone that a lot of folks don't know. I enjoyed going back and watching Arvell Reese, number 8, the off-ball linebacker, because I was focused on Sonny Sykes, the off-ball linebacker we talked about during the summer scouting. Both those young men might now make up the best linebacking core in college football even though LSU might have some questions about that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Arvell Reese was getting after it, and he was not going to be blocked. He played with a little juice off the snap in terms of his ability to shoot gaps and be very disruptive. He's wiry, his frame, but he plays much bigger than that. And I'm glad that you put him on my radar because that young man had an absolutely fantastic afternoon against Texas.
Yeah, man. Like you said, you mentioned the size. I think he's listed at 6'4", 240. He just, whenever Ohio State needed a play, he seemed to be involved, especially in the front. I think he finished the game with 9 tackles, a sack, another TFL, and he just made plays when the team, needed him to. And he just stood out to me. And, he's a person I'm excited to see, how he progresses. Because like I said, at 6'4", 240, he could play on the edge. He could play off ball. So he's going to be a versatile piece for Matt Patricia in his defense. And I could see them use him, a lot like Matt Patricia used a guy like Dante Hightower. A guy that you can, play on the edge, that can spot drop in coverage. But again, you can line him up off the ball in some looks and play there. So he was a guy that really caught my eye and just really one of the guys I say that caught my eye and just really jumped off the tape as soon as you saw the game.
All right, let's take the conversation to Sonny Stykes, his running mate at off-ball linebacker. And Sonny was just as versatile in terms of where they lined him up as Arvell Reese was. A lot of off-ball, they lined him up in the slot for a minute. He played coming off the edge. And another downhill terror is how I described him when I wrote him up in terms of his ability to be incredibly disruptive. One of the things we talked about over the summer, and this felt like a completely different player, and maybe that's a place where we should start, your perspective on that. I thought over the summer when I watched him, he looked like he was playing through a straw. And by that, I mean he wasn't aware of everything that was going on around him. Sometimes he would take false steps. He looked like he was playing, just pinning his ears back and just getting after it. And he looked much more comfortable in terms of what he was doing. And I'm just looking here. Arvell is a true senior. I think Sonny is a 20-year-old senior, so he's still young as well. But it felt like he made a lot of progress from last season to the start of this season, and whether that's working out over the summer or whatever the case may be. What does that tell you when you see a completely different player, at least early on in the season, based on what the tape told you last year?
That they took the offseason to heart and they put in the work. And so that is a true indication when you can see these guys progress. And when I'm doing my evaluations on these guys, that's why I like to take, a single year's note. So last year would have watched the 2024 tape. I create a whole note section for 2024. And then when I'm going to evaluate them this year, I'll come back and make a completely separate note section for 2025. And then you compare the notes because the things that you may have seen that were negatives or concerns in the previous year, you now can completely look at it objectively in the current year. And then take a step and say, okay, he really did improve here, or these things stayed the same, or, he went backwards here. And so Sonny Styles is a guy that's trending upwards. So like you said, just his frame, he's long, he's wiry, he's athletic, he can run. You saw the near interception that he had, which was just a good hustle play to the ball. And that's why they say you run to the ball, good things will happen. So he's a guy that I'm excited about as well. I'm looking at my rankings of the guys that I did. I had him based off the 2024 tape a little bit further down, but there are some good linebackers that I have ahead of him, but I can easily see him rising up on his rankings.
So just based on one game, and that was the only time I saw Arvell was over the weekend. Who's a better athlete? Because they both look like they're pretty good athletes.
I would probably right now give the nod to Arvell, just because I think he's big. I think he's bigger, from a mass and a weight standpoint, and to be able to carry that weight and still be able to move, be explosive, change direction. I have to give him the nod there.
And that's high praise because our guy Sonny's bringing it as well. You mentioned it earlier in the previous segment, but let's circle back because. I think Matt Patricia, the defensive coordinator at Ohio State, has taken some lumps in recent years after leaving Detroit and then going to Philadelphia and sort of doing that thing there where he was calling plays on defense. He was the offensive coordinator at one point in New England prior to that. That man as the young folks like to say, was in his bag on Saturday. And whether it was Arch or Quinn Ewers or whoever you want to put back there, Colt McCoy, doesn't matter, Vince Young, there were very few answers to be had offensively. And we know how good how good Sark is at dialing up plays to get his players in position to succeed. So give Matt Patricia a little praise here because he did a fantastic job.
Yeah, and you know, when we were talking about this game, you know, leading up to the show, he was one of the people that I put in there just saying, hey, I want to highlight, you know, both him and the LSU defensive coordinator, because so much of college football has been built around high scoring, which is why you see the spread offenses getting up and down the field fast, explosive plays. That's great for TV. And I've had people that I talk ball with, you know, one of my cousins in particular, shout out to my cousin Desmond, but him saying, oh, man, that game was boring. And that's where we are in life now, where a defensive game where, you know, team defenses are getting big stops and stopping people from scoring is now boring. Whereas, you know, I found it fun. It was a game that I was just stuck to my couch and just wanted to be able to watch just to see who was going to step up, who was going to make a play on either side, and how these defenses were giving these quarterbacks all these different looks. And that's what Matt Patricia is. That's what he's going to do. He's going to bring that NFL pedigree, and he's going to do things that are going to confuse these young quarterbacks and give them looks that they haven't seen, or just give them different variations of looks and where they won't know where things are coming from. So shout out to Matt Patricia. I thought he called a heck of a game the other day, and he really put these Big Ten offenses on notice.
Yeah, he did. And, you know, that pencil's stupid when things are going well. That pencil looks pretty good when he was playing the way he was dialing up plays over the weekend. Speaking of which, and let's keep this thing going on defense with Ohio State, cornerback Jermaine Mathews Jr. had himself a nice little afternoon. I think he's unofficially 5'11", might be verified. I'll double check. 5'11", 189, 190. Played off, but he can play man too, and he is physical throughout the route. He did give up that touchdown, the one touchdown pass that Arch threw, but he was right in the wide receiver's hip pocket. Just a great catch, and those things happen as well. But he was consistently around the ball, consistently making plays, and a lot of times when you see these college quarterbacks they're incredibly grabby, and they don't call it in college, which doesn't make sense to me, but here we are. And you have to almost project what that looks like at the next level. That's something Joey Porter Jr. struggled with at Penn State, and sometimes he still does. I saw physicality with Jermaine Mathews. I didn't see going over the line, creating penalty situations that would pop up in the NFL. I was impressed with him, and that was the first look I'd gotten at him.
No, same. And he flashed quick. And, you know, I want to use this as another opportunity to give a coach a shout out. Tim Walton, who is the co-defensive coordinator at Ohio State and secondary coach, coached DBs for a very long time in the National Football League. And he's one of the best I've ever seen it do it on the grass, just in terms of teaching the techniques and fundamentals. And this is just another DB in the long list of guys that Tim has had that he's developed. And Ohio State as well. So this kid, he really played well the other night. And you said he may be a verified 5'11". He felt taller than that and longer than that, you know, with the way he played. So, yeah, he played a really good game the other day.
Yeah, he had the interception against Arch in a play where he got turned around, got his bearings, and undercut the route, had the interception in the second half. Earlier in the game, he was playing cover 3, and the over was coming from the other side. And sometimes you get called ball watching when there's nothing for you to do. He made it to inside the 10, I think it's 5-yard line, had the PBU along with the safety over the top. And it just shows you that he's a smart player. He's been coached up well, and he's taken advantage of his opportunities. They stayed away from number 2, Caleb Downs. So there wasn't a lot to talk about with Caleb, but Caleb didn't do anything to disappoint. Caleb Carthon, as you like to call him around here. All right. That's it for Texas Ohio State. What a great way to start the season. That was a fun watch. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to take ourselves down to Clemson. And by the way, I wish Dabo could run down that hill. As someone who is similar in age to Dabo, my biggest fear is that both his legs are going to come off and he's going to roll all the way to the 20-yard line. But we can talk about that and LSU and the risers and fallers and popper and droppers right after this break. All right, Ran. I would like to do things more productive in the break than talk about all the things going on with producer Sharon and his football teams. But we spent a lot of time recounting the best players and coaches that come out of Temple University. So shout out to the Owls. Shout out to John Chaney, a real Temple Owl. Now we're going to talk about Clemson LSU because those teams were playing some ball this weekend. And the story was LSU was 0-5 in week one, last 5 seasons, and obviously that ain't going to fly. The other story that people weren't talking about, I think Clemson was like 1-4 or 1-5 against SEC teams the last time they played them. So they've struggled, and the struggle was real once again down in Clemson. And let's start with the poppers. Let's start with the risers. We'll start with Garrett Nussmeier, and then we'll move our way over to Cade Klubnik. Garrett, again, he's 6 feet 5/8 verified, so he's under 6 feet. He's got a big arm. We know he's a coach's son, and he plays like it. I think the way he played against Clemson, and then he got off to a slow start, but he picked it up down the stretch, looked a lot like what we saw from Garrett over the first half of last season before the wheels fell off and the turnovers started happening. Nothing but positive takeaways from what he did there. Anything that he did in Clemson that concerns you?
No, what I liked the most about how he played the other day was he just kept his calm. He kept his poise and was just kept sawing and just kept going at it, drive after drive. Some drives didn't go, the way that they wanted to. He was getting a little bit of pressure. He was, misfiring on some balls. But he just stayed after it, stayed consistent, stayed calm. And then you could just see the team feeding off of him and his energy, from the sideline. And then the most, I guess it shouldn't be surprising to anybody, but usually when you're a quarterback and you have been a certain number, he's been number 13 throughout his whole career. And we know what the number 18 means at LSU, the number 18 and the number 7. We know what those numbers mean. And for him to be willing to change his number to number 18 because it was bestowed upon him, from his teammates and the program says a lot about who he is from a maturity and leadership standpoint. So he really impressed. And I think he played at the level that we've come to expect. You mentioned, how he played at the beginning of the year was more close to that. He had some mistakes in the later part of the year. I thought the later part of the year he was trying to do too much, trying to be too cute and make all these throws because he probably was reading his clippings and everyone talked about, the gunslinger mentality. But I thought this week, he played complimentary football and didn't put the ball in harm's way when the defense was playing as great as it was.
And credit to him and his teammates, some of whom we're going to talk about here in a second, for overcoming, quotation marks, that Clemson defense that we've all spent a lot of time talking about. I didn't know Peter Woods was out there. I didn't know TJ Parker was out there for most of the game. I haven't gone back and watched them individually in terms of the coaches' tape, but they weren't flashing on the broadcast. Garrett Nussmeier was, and also flashing was number 1. Another guy you wanted to highlight, wide receiver Aaron Anderson, a guy that we both liked over the summer. We talked about him over the summer. He is undersized, played primarily out of the slot. They had no answers for Aaron Anderson, whether it was in the quick game, screens, running intermediate routes. He was running away from dudes all evening long. That's also a good start because he struggled with focus drops at times last year. Didn't see any of that in Clemson on Saturday night.
Yeah, I could appreciate them moving him around to different spots. Like you said, he's a guy that's a bit undersized, but they moved him around to different spots and got the ball in his hands. And the thing I don't think he gets enough credit for because of his size is how strong he is with the ball in his hands. And you saw that on a couple of catches where he was able to get yards after the catch. As you see there on the graphic, he has 6 catches for 99 yards on the day. And some of those plays came when they needed. I think he had a big explosive catch and run for 30-something yards. And he was just – it got a point in one of those drives. I want to say it possibly was in the third or fourth quarter when he got the ball on 2 or 3 plays, on that drive. And he made plays and got them in a scoring position. So he's a guy that should be a riser, especially with this draft class at receiver. There's really no clear-cut wide receiver 1 in this group, and so he has a chance to make a case for it.
Yeah, I was happy to see that because a lot of times you watch a guy over the summer, and this is my fault. I got to do a better job of this. And then you like him, and then you see that he's 2 or 3 or 4 inches shorter than you thought or didn't weigh as much, and then you change your opinion. He's still the same football player you saw and liked or didn't like. So I'm glad he came out strong. I'm going to give you an opportunity, and this is how I know you're a former front office GM guy, because you want to give all the credit to the coaching staff. So Blake Baker, the defensive coordinator for LSU, he was on your list. And I'll just give you some names to work around. Guys that we talked about over the summer. Whit Weeks, the linebacker, number 40, balled out. And I went back and watched our clips from the summer scouting. We both agreed that he is incredibly instinctive and always in the right place. I saw a little more juice athletically than I remember seeing, so I don't know if he was injured when we watched him last year, whatever it was, credit to him. Mansur Delane, number 4, the cornerback, transfer from Virginia Tech. Ball skills through the roof. That's why they went out and got him. We saw that. Had 1 interception, almost had 2, and was consistently in the hip pocket or whoever he was guarding. Harold Perkins coming off the ACL, first game back. He showed flashes. I thought he was moving well for someone who hasn't played football since last September. And then, of course, your guy, Blake Baker, the defensive coordinator. Wrap it up with what he did and how he got all them dudes balling out.
Well, I tell you what, man, this was another classic example of what we've been talking about, these defensive coordinators catching up to these offenses. I mean, you see this game was a 17-10 game with 2 highly touted quarterbacks, 2 offenses that had weapons at the receiver position. Now, Antonio Williams wasn't able to finish the game after the first drive or so due to a hamstring injury. But this defense was just flying around, and they did so without bringing they did bring a lot of pressure, but just from a variety of looks, and then them having the ability to use Harold Perkins, who still doesn't have a home position, which I think is going to affect him as he goes through the draft process. But man, he's a cool, unique piece to have who can run. He's going to be a legitimate low 4.4 guy. And you saw when you have an athletic quarterback in Cade Klubnik, you could just spy him and he could just run him down. And then our guy Whit Weeks, who is my linebacker 3 at this point, you can ding him or knock him for what you think he is or is not athletically, but the guy's instincts and just natural ability to play football is just out of control. And then you mentioned the transfer from Virginia Tech. That was my first time seeing him in the game, and I made sure I put a little highlight note to make sure I go back and watch some Virginia Tech tape. But just this defense as a whole was a ton of fun. My 7-year-old Reese, we were watching the game together, and it was pretty cool that he knew who Whit Weeks and his brother Wes Weeks, he knew who they both were. And I'm like, hey, buddy, I was like, how do you know these guys? He was like, oh, I watched that SEC show on Netflix. So I guess I need to catch up, with that with my son. But, like I said, these defensive coordinators, man, they're putting these offenses on notice, and I'm excited to see how it's going to go for the rest of the season.
Hey, Reese, you could just watch With the First Pick, and you could find out about Whit and his brother as well. You ain't got to give Netflix a shout out. I ain't mad at you. I'm kidding. Hey, by the way, before we take a break here, and maybe we'll talk about it on the other side as well, Cade Klubnik looked like Cade Klubnik, who started that Georgia game 12 months ago. Not necessarily knock. He just wasn't as sharp as Nuss, and he was closer to Arch. I thought he left a lot of clean pockets. He was under duress all night in his defense. Any concern about Cade in week 1? Because I know you're not as high on him as some other folks that you certainly know in the league and folks I've talked with and even folks in the media.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just reserve judgment for now. We'll just I'm gonna give him the same benefit of the doubt that I gave Arch, and just say it was week 1. You played against a really good defense, and let's just see how week 2, see how you progress from week 1 to week 2. I'll just leave it there. But a lot of what I saw in the game was a lot of what I saw consistently when I watched his tape last year.
Yeah, and there are varying opinions about Cade. And when you talk to people at Clemson, they say you will not find a finer human being and teammate. So that's obviously important, but he's also under 6'2", and the concerns that come with that, and then the ability to do the things to get better that we just didn't see. But again, I think your larger point is an important one. Let's just wait and let this thing play out. Not a great start, but that's okay. Congratulations to Nuss. Arch and Cade are back in the lab, and we'll see what that looks like going forward. For now, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some other names we love from over the weekend across the football landscape, and we'll do that right after this break. All right, Ran. I like to spend our commercial breaks preparing for the next segment. Producer Sharon is regaling us with his exploits on video games and how he's building Temple into a powerhouse. So that could be a whole other show. Maybe that'll be the With the First Pick After Dark, watching Sharon run a program into the ground. All right, let's talk about some other guys in the real world, IRL, Sharon. That's what the kids call it. and the Vidya games that we liked because there was a lot of good football over the weekend. And I'm going to go down to Baylor, where Auburn went down there, and they planted their flag and sent a message. That offensive line down there is legit. We knew about Xavier Chaplin. We talked about him during summer scouting, the left tackle. We knew about your guy, Connor Liu, the center. He looked every bit as good and maybe even better than what I remember from last season. And then they have Jeremiah Wright, the right guard, who actually played a few snaps at left guard as well over the course of that game. And that offensive line is cooking. So I was incredibly impressed with that. Also impressed, I'm going to give you another name. And they only quotation marks. I don't mean to take away from Illinois State, but John Mateer in Oklahoma. John Mateer remains exciting. I'm going to continue to say Baker, Mayfield, Gardner Minshew, and Uncle Rico. That is who he is. His arm is big. And I talk about a lot, and perhaps you're tired of hearing about it already, Ran, the fact that Cade Klubnik and Nuss are under 6'2". Mateer's a unverified 6'1" as well, but he's a good athlete, big arm, and incredibly exciting. I don't know if you saw any of what he did, but even based on last year's tape, it feels like, and I know you were higher on him than I was during the summer, he might be a first-round conversation piece by the time it's all said and done.
I haven't been able – I'm just smiling because I hadn't been able to watch his game yet. I did check the box score, which I have a habit of doing throughout games, just checking box scores to see what the stat lines are looking like. But I'm looking at my rankings, and I have him ranked with an arrow up coming into the season. Yep. So I feel, regardless of the opponent, I feel really good about him. And man, he was a ton of fun to watch last year at Washington State.
Another guy that I think, I don't want to speak for you, but you can let me know, you and I had questions about, another potential arrow pointing up guy. We'll call him a squinter because of the athleticism. DJU's brother, Mateo Uiagalelei. I think they played Montana State, but they might as well not have had any offensive linemen out there the way he was running through those dudes. And it was, if that continues, and obviously the competition is going to get better, that's going to be an arrow pointing up situation as well. So those were some guys that I had a lot of fun watching. And if you're an Alabama fan, I would encourage you to look away. Don't turn off because we always love to have viewers. But BC's own Thomas Castellanos transferred to Florida State. And, man, they took it to the Crimson Tide down there in Tallahassee. And he had a lot to do with it. What a fun watch that was, especially for a Florida State team that took a lot of beatings last year.
Yeah, man, you can tell the team feeds off of his confidence and his style of play. And, you can't help but to see him and see some comparisons to Kyler Murray just because of the stature, both of those guys' running ability, and then their ability to just flick it and get the ball out. And he had some impressive plays. And like I said, he was a ton of fun to watch. And I want to see how this is going to look as the season progresses, because they still need some guys to step up around him to be able to, make plays for him. And so he doesn't have to rely so much on his legs and his escapability to create plays and explosives for him downfield. But, man, what a great start to jump out on Bama. Shout out to B-Mac for getting that win. And shout out to my niece Alana, because I know she's a Florida State grad, so I won't hear the end of it. And I hope my Gators, whoever's doing the advanced scouting, I hope we're starting early, because this is a game I don't want to see us lose later in the year. But Thomas Castellanos, he really could be a problem for some teams.
Man, that was a nervous laugh you just had there. Like you might be a little concerned about what might be coming your way. It's funny because, unfortunately, in that great season they had a couple years ago, Jordan Travis got hurt late. And then they went to the bowl game and got the doors blown off just because everyone was sitting out. I remember talking to Braden Fisk about that. He chose not to play in that bowl game, and they didn't have any answers. And then last year was what last year was. DJU came, got hurt, it didn't work out, so on and so forth. And then it almost feels like they excel when they have an athletic quarterback. Now, I don't think we're having draft conversations yet about Tommy Castellanos, but that doesn't mean we can't find a role for him at some point. There are a lot of things that he only 9 for 14 right there. You see that. But never say never, correct? Especially in week one. And there's a lot of ways you can use guys who are just good football players.
Yeah, no, exactly. And for me, like I said, just watching him play and just his playmaking ability. Now, we'll get to some point where we're talking about his pro projection, but I think him as a playmaker, I think there are scouts that are now going to look and they're going to start projecting like where can he play at the next level, and if he can play another position. Obviously, I compared him to Kyler from a movement skills, height, stature, those things. But a lot of what Kyler did at Oklahoma was special. And that's what led to him being the number 1 overall pick. I don't think Thomas is quite that. But I think with his playmaking skills, there can be a spot for him somewhere at the National Football League level.
Yeah, not to keep bringing it back to this, but I wrote about this for CBS Sports, and I made you read it as well. I wrote about just shortest quarterbacks. Since 2010, there have been 50 quarterbacks taken in the first round. 7 have been under 6'2". Kyler, Baker, Bryce, and there may be a couple more that were obviously under 6'1", that were first overall picks. And to your point, Kyler was special. Baker had a big arm, threw with accuracy, team leader. Bryce was almost the exception because he didn't do anything incredibly well. He was really good at processing, but he didn't have a big arm, obviously slight of frame. So just something to keep an eye on when we talk about these quarterbacks. But it does feel like there's a movement towards understanding that just because you look like Anthony Richardson doesn't mean you're destined for success. You can be a smaller quarterback and have success. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was this. Everyone was, clutching their pearls when Castellanos said a couple months ago, that Alabama, they don't have Nick Saban anymore, so we ain't worried about it. No one seemed to care about that Saturday while they were storming the field in Tallahassee.
Man, but that's that's the confidence I spoke to. And I think if you go back, and this is no shot on DJ from last year, but he didn't play with a ton of confidence. And I think that kind of permeated throughout the team. And I thought you saw more juice out of this Florida State team in week 1 than you have in a very long time.
And again, DJU is another example, not to rain down on DJU, but he was a 5-star, 6'4", 6'5", big arm, and it just never came together for him. But Tommy C is bringing the juice on day 1. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back here, we're going to talk about some more guys that we had a lot of fun watching this weekend. We're going to make our way down to one of producer Sharon's other teams. Going to go down there, Hard Rock Stadium, and talk about the U and that matchup that they had against Notre Dame. We'll do that right after this break. All right, Ran, before we talk a little U-ball, let's talk a little South Carolina ball. LaNorris Sellers, Nick Harbor, one of the best athletes on planet Earth, let alone football, had 2 touchdowns, asterisk, 1 got called back. A lot of interesting calls. Nuss had a complaint to be made about a touchdown that he got called back as well in that LSU game. But LaNorris Sellers looked a lot like LaNorris Sellers. That touchdown he had in the first quarter, that's why he's the best running back in the SEC, and I mean that as a complete positive. Had some big-time throws, unleashed someone, a 64-yarder to Nick Harbor on that touchdown in the second half. But we also saw a lot of the stuff we saw last year where he's not going to throw with anticipation, and he may not get through his reads as much as you would like. I would, again, caution pushing LaNorris into this draft class. I would like to see him get better and maybe even come back, but that's not the world we live in. What'd you think about his debut against Virginia Tech?
A lot of what you said. He made the plays that we knew him to make. And that wasn't the question coming into the year. I think the big thing, and you said you want to see him develop it over another year. I wanted to see him continue to develop as a passer of the football. We know what the athlete is. We know the arm strength and, the proverbial arm talent. We know he could throw the ball a mile and probably has the highest mile per hour, in terms of zip and velocity on the ball. But we want to see you be able to process, get the ball out quick and go through your progressions. And so that's what I want to see him work on throughout the rest of the season. And we talked about it. I mean, a lot for LaNorris is going to be the gift and the curse of Anthony Richardson, and what that's going to look like. And will LaNorris because he can be compared to Anthony Richardson, but is that going to give people even more caution because of what's transpired with Anthony Richardson thus far? Or can we objectively look at these guys as 2 different players? Yeah,
all accounts, LaNorris is a great young man. And obviously, athletically, we know he can do on the field. Right now, you need a quarterback. Would you take him in the first round?
No.
Okay, I think that's fair, and I think that's important to stress. Okay, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about LaNorris, and once he gets red hot, we'll revisit that conversation. Let's talk about another quarterback, a young man that had to transfer from Georgia down to the U. And I'll be honest, Carson Beck looked a lot like what we saw at Georgia last year. He's a game manager, and I mean that in the most positive sense. When the game was down the line and they, at the end of the game during the fourth quarter, they didn't ask Carson to do anything except hand the ball off. And I don't know if that's more about Carson or more about Cristobal just wanting to run out the clock and kick a game winner, trusting his field goal kicker. So what were your thoughts on Carson in his debut for the U? I thought he looked a lot like the Georgia quarterback.
No, I agree with what you just said. I think the game managing part, and it's funny that you said, maybe they just wanted to play conservative, get the ball in the field goal range for their field goal kicker. Well, that field goal kicker, that was his first field goal kick for the U, because he's a transfer in from Florida Atlantic. And so you would think that they would want to put the ball in Carson Beck's hand a little bit more. But, I think overall he played well. And the other takeaway I took was listening to Marcus Freeman speak at halftime when they asked, hey, what would you like to see your defense do? And he was like, man, we have to be able to get pressure with the front four. And he was like, because if not, it's going to be a long day for us. And I think that speaks to, him saying that, like, we want to play coverage and not give Carson Beck these one-on-one opportunities to throw, because when there was someone open, he typically hit them. It was just, those tight window throws that you wanted to see him make a little bit more, which is what I'm about to say now is not fair to him, but I'm going to say it. Like, this is a different offense than you saw from when Cam Ward went there as a one-year starter last year. It was a little bit more open. I get it. The weapons have changed, and I think they have all new receivers there. But this offense, they threw the ball around the yard a little bit more, and they put it in Cam's hands a little bit more than they did last night with Carson Beck.
I haven't had a chance to go back and watch Francis Mauanoa, the right tackle, who we spent a lot of time talking about this summer, and you are of the opinion that maybe he moves inside at the next level. One snap in particular, he was on the struggle bus a little bit, but I don't know. He could have had a good game. That stuck out in my mind. Boubacar Traore, the redshirt sophomore edge rusher, Notre Dame. Keep an eye on this young man. Christian Gray, the cornerback for Notre Dame, had a second-round grade on him over the summer. I think he made his way into my top 50. I have to double-check. He had a pretty good evening as well. And let's talk about Jeremiyah Love, who's the running back one, for everyone on planet Earth. Never quite got going, and that could be a function of a lot of things. What were your thoughts on his inability to be a difference maker in the way that I'm sure Notre Dame fans were hoping?
You have a first year quarterback. You're on the road. You're going against a fairly good Miami defense that has a ton of players. He's got to have more than 10 carries. And there was at no point in the game where the game was away from them where they had to throw to get back in it. He has to touch the ball more. And then the other thing to take away from Jeremiyah Love, like, I get it. I know you're athletic, but you got to stop trying to hurdle people. Like, that's a recipe for disaster. He did it at least 4 or 5 times, and It looks cool, when you're able to do it, and it makes for a highlight. But, man, you got to keep your feet on the ground and find other ways to make people miss.
Yeah, I agree. And he could have been pressing as well. We talked about Nuss pressing last season. Maybe that's what Jeremiah was feeling coming into this. So, all right, I'm going to give Ruben Bain Jr. a little shout out because he balled out. The bowling ball balled out, and you were giving him a hard time this summer about his edge rush ability. We know he can play the run, and we're running out of time, so you don't even get to say anything. You just got to sit there and take it. Ruben Bain Jr., Ran Carthon apologizes on your behalf, and on behalf of Sharon, he is quite happy that Ruben played the way he did. We'll talk about Ruben into the future. All right, that's it for us here. Great week 1 to college football. Cannot wait to keep talking about these guys. Check out With the First Pick wherever you get your podcast. Scan that QR code, and we will check you guys out in the next one.